All right, and we are back with a new tier list. This one I've put the most amount of effort into out of any video on my channel so far. This is the experimental film tier list. This didn't exist before. I made up this tier list in particular because I've seen all these films. These were all films that were in my curriculum when I went to school at Binghamton University. And yeah, I just want to get into them a little bit. I feel like I'm the most qualified person in existence to do this video. When I was making up this list of experimental films, I was trying to get things that I had seen before, films that I have strong feelings for, or maybe against in some cases. And I was also trying not to include traditional narrative films. There's some close calls. I was going to include Mulholland Drive, but then if I included Mulholland Drive, I'd have to include something like The Shining, or it opens up a whole whirlpool of other movies that it could be. So I tried to keep the format strictly experimental, which also means experimental shorts. One other thing, I just wanted to note that I made this tier list on the Tier List Maker website. So if you want to do it yourself, you can fill it out at this link. Have fun doing it. Meshes of the Afternoon, Maya Deren, 1943. Good. It's pretty good. Filming these videos is basically a constant struggle of restarting my phone and making sure that it has enough storage to shoot the damn files, because it takes me so long to gather my thoughts on these things. Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for Meshes of the Afternoon, and another character on this list, another filmmaker, Stanley Brakhage, wanted to discredit Maya Deren by saying that her husband made most of the film. And I think that's probably some bullshit. Maya Deren is a great filmmaker, and Stan Brakhage sounded like a bitter old tramp. Meshes of the Afternoon. Absolute groundbreaking girl boss energy, black and white masterpiece, shadow play beyond belief. We're going to put it in the A tier. Dog Star Man by Stan Brakhage. Now here's the thing. If I didn't just learn that little bit about Stan Brakhage trying to discredit our queen Maya Deren, I would have rated him higher. But honestly, that's a dickhead move. Fun fact about Stan Brakhage, he worked with markers and ink a lot, and for doing that for like 50 years, it got under his fingernails and in his eyelids and stuff, and he developed eye cancer and died. And a lot of people speculate that it was because of the markers. Dog Star Man, though. Dog Star Man is a really interesting one. It's like 4 hours long. There's a bunch of different parts, and it's about a man climbing up a mountain with his dog, and he cuts down a tree, and it gets more and more experimental the closer to the tree he gets, and then he accomplishes that goal, and he kind of goes back down the mountain, if I recall, but it's like every single experimental cinematic technique is used in this film, like every one ever. We're going to put Dog Star Man in the B tier. Wavelength. I really like Wavelength. Wavelength is a 40-minute film. It's all one shot in one apartment. Kind of zooms in on this wall across the room. And there's like a loose plot of like a murder mystery. But what's really great about this movie is that it uses like sound environments to change the apartment into many different things. Like there's times when the radio's playing and then the apartment is a chill place. And then there's times where it's a dead silence and you start to get uneasy. Towards the end of the film, there's this climbing sine wave. It's going higher and higher. And by the end, it's like a crazy siren. And the film has zoomed in so far into just one piece of paper across the room. And it's a bunch of waves. And it's like sine waves, wavelength. Great punchline to a pretty entertaining movie. Overall, I'm putting Wavelength in the S tier. It also includes a real live radio broadcast of Strawberry Fields Forever from 1967. Very cool. Serene Velocity. Okay, the reason that this is shown at Binghamton University, it was shot at Binghamton in the hallways of the cinema department. If you ever see this one, it's super jarring. It's like claustrophobic, I guess. You're in a very long hallway. And that's actually the hallway at Binghamton University's cinema department. The cinema department's kind of in the basement at Binghamton University. And so they have these super long hallways, and it's kind of spooky. And if you're the only one down there and the fluorescent lights are flickering, it kind of feels like that movie. One other thing about Serene Velocity and about all experimental films If it makes you want to throw up because it's so experimental, it loses some points. So we're going to put Serene Velocity in C for chunks, as in blowing chunks. Outer Space by Tchaikovsky. This is a really cool film. Freaking blew my mind, dude. This film just has a lot of visual energy, I would say. And it uses its techniques very wisely. This film was just edited from somebody's B-roll. Like they were working on a 35 millimeter black and white feature film. And then Tchaikovsky took this footage and manipulated it with contact printing and with re-exposure and all that fancy experimental stuff. And it turns into something completely radical. So we're going to put Outer Space in S tier. The active scene with one's own eyes. Okay, so back to what I was saying about throwing up when you watch a bad experimental film. You want to throw up sometimes. The active scene with one's own eyes. It's like a bunch of human dissection, like what's that called? Autopsy footage. So they're cutting people's brains open and their scalps and shit. And it's very disturbing. It's incredibly disturbing. And it's like 35 minutes long, and it's not really reflective of death or anything like that, like you'd hope. It's a lot of zooming in and shaking the camera and like flashing images of gore and brains and stuff. I'm going to put the active scene with one's own eyes in the F tier because I think it like literally failed to do what it was trying to do. Stan Brakhage is the man, but that was a miscalculation. The Tree of Life. Okay, pause. You're asking, why is the Tree of Life in here? That is not on the same level of experimentation as these other movies. No, you weren't saying that? Okay, well then I'll just move on. Yeah, The Tree of Life is definitely the most straightforward movie on this list, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. I think it's experimental in story structure and it's experimental in character structure because you got that future guy who's like reminiscing on his life in the 50s and you don't know who's really telling the truth or like the unreliable narrator thing. Honestly, it's pretty flashy. I remember last time I watched it, it felt more vapid than the first time I watched it because the first time I watched it, I was like 14 or something. And so you're very impressionable at that age to like deep stuff. You want to think that everything's very deep. In the movie, they just cut to a bunch of random nature shots, whereas in like Badlands or Terrence Malick's other movie, in those movies, like he works it into the plot to use nature, but in Tree of Life, he's so free with it, kind of falls flat. So we're going to put Tree of Life in the D tier because it's not that experimental. Nostalgia by Hollis Frampton. In this film, Hollis Frampton is telling stories like vignettes from his life, and he's burning a photograph at the same time. And so you're hearing the voiceover, and you're seeing the image burn up over like a stove. And it's kind of cool to see the image, the photographs that he's burning. It's kind of cool to see them dissolve and then turn black and then white and then burn up. Like, it's a bit of a process. And the thing is, he's always burning the photograph after telling the story. So the photograph corresponds to the story from before. You have to remember the previous story while he's telling the new one about the burning picture. Is it super impressive? No. Is it tight? Yeah. We're going to put it in the B tier. Empire by Andy Warhol. I was wondering about if I was going to include Andy Warhol at all on this list because he's not strictly an experimental filmmaker. He was more of just like a pop artist icon kind of thing. And he used film as his medium sometimes. I remember the professors saying some ludicrous stuff about Andy Warhol, like that he rewrote cinematic history in 2 years by doing a bunch of camera tests. It's like, camera tests? That's what changed? Like, come on now. I don't think that somebody as undedicated to film as Andy Warhol really impacted all that much. That was a stupid rant, and I hope I cut it out. Empire, Andy Warhol. I think it's like 6 hours of the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, the Eiffel Tower. The Empire State Building. It's like 6 hours of the Empire State Building, and then it's slowed down by like 30%, I think. So it plays back at 18 frames a second. You see planes fly by, and you see the lights go on and come off overnight. I think it's a pretty epic movie. I haven't actually sat through the 8 hours of it. I think we watched 20 to 30 minutes of it when we were in class. I think if I did watch the 8-hour version of it, maybe I'd have more appreciation for it. One good thing about Empire is that it is exactly what you would imagine for the Empire State Building. Because the Empire State Building represents, the empire of like New York and America and the American dream and all that big stuff. So like a film to represent that might be low resolution, but you better believe it's going to be 8 hours long, and it's going to be just the giant stature of that building as like a metaphor or like a true to life visual of it. Kind of cool. We're going to put it in the A tier because it's pretty darn cool. Man with a Movie Camera by Dziga Vertov. Gotta say, this is one of my favorite movies on this list. Definitely going in S tier. In the 1920s, one thing that people were doing was visual realism and cinematic realism, trying to capture, marketplaces, train stations, things like that, for newsreel footage or just for capturing the actuality of the events. And Man with a Movie Camera, it heightens the actuality of events while still depicting them as they are. One of my favorite definitions of cinema, just the way it's shot and edited, is what makes it matter. And I think this movie does that perfectly. So perfectly, I think I have to move Wavelength down to A tier because there should be a lot of room up at S tier, I think. La Jetée. La Jetée is very similar to Nostalgia. I'm just putting it there for now because I think they're kind of similar. So La Jetée is a film that's told, again, all through photographs, kind of like Hollis Frampton's movie. This movie is like a sci-fi movie, and it's all still frames. I think from a movie that they really shot, their continuity photographs. They ended up retelling the story with just narration and photographs. La Jetée should go higher than Nostalgia for experimentalism because it still tries to tell a story that is somewhat heightened by like surreality, while Hollis Frampton's story is more personal and true to life. That down in C tier, which honestly I think is where it belongs. Ooh, By Foot Candlelight by Mary Helena Clarke. Okay, Mary Helena Clarke is one of my favorite filmmakers. She also did this one called Glass Note. She uses footage that's from different formats, so like VHS and 16 millimeter or like 8 millimeter in video. And she'll just edit them together. I think in this movie, they kind of cuts. I'll put a couple cuts in here so you see what I mean. They work, but they work in such a unique way that it's just Mary Helena Clarke. Okay, moving on to House. Would be S tier if this was just a movie ranking, but unfortunately, it's not. This is a experimental film ranking. But House is incredibly experimental. Okay, here's where I'm at. House is one of the most exhilarating cinema experiences I've ever had. When I watched that movie, I freaking lost my mind. I was laughing my ass off, and it was just blowing my mind every step of the way. One of my favorite scenes from House is when they're all walking down the stairs to pick up a phone call, and they lengthen the exposure of the shot so that when they're walking, there's like this really blurred motion effect, and it's really eerie. And I also like the green lighting in that movie. I remember there's a couple times where there's green light to kind of show that the grandma is a little insidious, I also like that the characters in that movie are like archetype characters. Like there's the smart one and the funny one and, the jock one or the athletic one, House is really great. Un Chien Andalou, a classic. Salvador Dali, can you believe it? That he worked on this one. Okay, yeah, we got to put it in the S because a lot of people know that one who don't even know anything about experimental film. They recognize the goat's eye being sliced in half. That's right. You heard that right. It was not a real woman's eye that was sliced in half. I think they used either a pig's eye or a goat's eye. What do we got next? Window Water Baby Moving. Stan Brakhage. Long story short, films his wife giving birth. Very much in the same way that he filmed all the dead bodies with the zooms in and the close-ups. He's kind of like trying to be shocking with it. But like, if the whole point is that birth is natural and it's not supposed to be shocking, you shouldn't be shooting it that way. It's like the opposite of what you're trying to like, I don't know. And maybe that's what he was going for, is that he shoots it like it's a car crash or something, but it's just like a human woman giving birth. Anyway, B tier because I feel weird putting it anywhere on this list. Eraserhead. David Lynch's classic. I would put it in S tier, but I don't have like a personal crazy love for this movie. It was Stanley Kubrick's favorite movie, and so it's like has a bunch of accolades, and I like it. I recognize how original and cool it is. It took like 5 years for David Lynch to finance and shoot it. I respect all that, but I'm gonna have to put it in A tier, homie. Koyaanisqatsi. And we watched one part of it in film school, and it was a bunch of flying over flower fields and like sulfur mines. Pretty visuals. It's like a world cinematic experience. I guess it was one of the first movies to be like that, because there's later movies like Barkhage and Samsara. I don't know, Koyaanisqatsi. It was pretty exciting. It's pretty damn exciting. We're gonna put it in B tier. Lemon. All right, Lemon is the first movie going in E tier because it's not a failure, but I hate this movie. It's so boring, and it has nothing to do with anything. It's like, it's exactly what I worry that my movies are like sometimes, like just irrelevant. If you like Lemon, that's cool. You can like Lemon. It's going in E tier. Touching by Paul Sheridis. See. This one's like an epileptic seizure again, and he's got scissors at one point, and he's like mocking to cut out his tongue, but because it's stop motion, this like idea doesn't really happen. Like, he never really cuts off his tongue, but by showing you the scissors in these motions, kind of looks like it. I remember being pretty bored. It's like 29 minutes long, and and he just says, I think he says the same word: destroy, 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 destroy. And it's like, you get this feeling sometimes with experimental films that they know what they're doing, and it's boring, and like, what am I trying to say? It's one of the weaknesses of experimental film, is that what it has going for it is that it's eluding your understanding. And if you understand it early on and it doesn't challenge that at all, it's like you're catching the film with its pants down. Scorpio Rising, bunch of gay Nazi sex. I mean, yeah, it is. It literally is. It's Kenneth Anger, who is an interesting character. I think he's a hell of a character. Scorpio Rising, though. Damn, is that S tier? Scorpio Rising is going to be... I actually remember being really engaged the whole time this movie was playing. I didn't like the pop soundtrack, but I did like when he was getting his bike ready and like getting his gear, his leather on. I was wondering, like, where's he going and what's this going to be like? And the film just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. There's dudes standing like in old churches and giving speeches, and people doing crazy shit, covering each other in mustard and having orgies. You know what? That sentence alone sends this movie into S tier. Dude, Kenneth Anger was on something else when he decided he's going to make that movie. The Black Tower. The theme is that there's this black tower that was erected in this guy's neighborhood, and he just keeps looking at it, and he can see it from all angles. I think it emits a sound sometimes, and it's just driving him crazy. And the whole footage is like kind of like his point of view with his narration. We're going to put it in C tier because it's a little one-dimensional. You never get to see what's in the tower. The Return to Reason. All right. This one's by Man Ray. Coolest name ever. This movie's from the 20s, and it's extremely experimental. We're going to put it in A tier because it inspired many of my favorite sequences. Inland Empire by David Lynch. This movie is on this list because I said it was shot on mini DV, but it was digital. And that is definitely experimental. A very experimental decision for 2006. David Lynch, who has worked on film up until that point, decided to work in video and shot a whole movie with Laura Dern in video. And then how does he promote this weird type of movie? He sits on a street corner with a cow and a billboard, and he promoted the damn thing, and people went and they saw it. Not a lot of people, to be fair, but he still got the film out there. One thing you can say about it is that it's definitely true to David Lynch's own experience and vision, and that is part of what being experimental is all about. Inland Empire near Eraserhead? No. Inland Empire is a little boring sometimes. It takes a long time to do its thing. Boring's not the right way to think about it, because when you watch this movie, you're in for 3 hours. So it doesn't matter whether you're bored or not. It's going to be in the B tier. Then we have A Movie by Bruce Conner. This movie's pretty damn cool. He used a bunch of newsroom stock footage of nuclear bombs and people surfing, stethoscopes and telescopes, and he edits it all together into a movie. And it's kind of cool that it's called A Movie because organically, when you watch it, you start to wonder the obvious question, like, what is a movie? Does this count as a movie? It's a bunch of newsreel footage. I think that this movie is going to be in the A or B tier because it's not being overly experimental and it's not like hitting you over the head. It's just like scratching a little itch of wondering, what is a movie? So it's going to put that one in B tier. The Holy Mountain by Jorodowsky. It was good until they started like breathing in their own feces. They smoked their own feces in that movie, and somebody has sex with a mountain. It starts with Jesus or something, and then there's like the lizards, and they're fighting each other. They're lizards with crowns on them. Super experimental, and I'm glad that somebody on Earth in history had a bunch of money, or a good enough amount of money, like Jorodowsky, to make that movie, because it is pretty weird. Never seen anything like it. So we're gonna put it in the A tier, and then it looks like we just have one more left. It's this. Yeah, no, we don't have any more left. That has been the tier list, everybody, and I hope that you yourself will fill out this tier list, because I spent a good amount of time making it and getting all the thumbnails and stuff, and I wrote out a description so that people can tell which movies they are. Yeah, this is my experimental film tier list. It's a little bit upside down, as you see. I tend to give movies that do their best S tier, you know, and I give that out, I guess, pretty liberally. Maybe some of these movies could be lesser. I got to be harsher on my next one, maybe. I don't know. If you enjoyed this video, just give it a whirl, man. Fill out this. Watch some of these movies. If some of these little snippets looked cool, I recommend you get into a little bit of experimental film. Don't go too deep, though. It gets really wild, and then you forget what movies even are. So keep it real. Be making real movies while you also enjoy the experimental side of things. If you freaking enjoyed the content, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Liam out.
All right, tomahawk ribeye, baby. No, I didn't drop it in dirt. Grow up. Smoke it at 225 until it hits 120 internal. Take it off. Let it rest for a sec. Then we're going to go ahead and sear it on a hot bed of charcoal. No, it's not burnt. Black rub. Remember from the beginning, grow up. All right, cut a little bit away from the bone so you don't cut it in the bone. You can chew in the bone later.